Okay, I think we can get started now. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Will Reedhead. I am the Global Monitoring Officer with UN Water based in Geneva, and I'm the coordinator of the Integrated Monitoring Initiative for SDG 6. And I'm happy to welcome all of you to the second global workshop on integrated monitoring of SDG 6 and water and sanitation. Today, we're being joined by lots of country focal points for SDG 6 monitoring, as well as a number of UN custodian agencies for the global indicators, as well as a number of partners interested in SDG 6 monitoring. So it's great being together today. For those of you who remember us a few years ago, we had our first global workshop in The Hague in 2017, following the first global data drive, which established our global baseline. We did our second data collection exercise last year. And so this global workshop is kind of the same point in time in relative terms compared to the data drive. So this is a good time for us to get together and reflect on SDG 6 monitoring. Maria can go to the next slide, please. So I'd like to kick us off with a few numbers that I think are inspiring. The first one is 8.2. So 8.2 is the average number of global indicators out of 11 that UN member states reported during the 2020 data drive. That's 8.2 out of 11. And that's really good because we started out in 2015 with 0. Obviously, we were just starting. And then as of last year, we were up to 7.2, and now we're up to 8.2. So we've really covered quite a lot of ground. The next number is 130. So the 130 refers to the number of countries that have overall focal points. And I'll tell you a bit more about why that's important a bit later, but that's 130 countries across the world. So that's about 2/3 of the world's countries. And that's up from only 30 countries back in 2017. The next number is 193. You may recognize that as the number of UN member states in the world. And in fact, that is what it is, because that's the countries we've gotten data from. All UN member states have given us at least one indicator worth of data during the last data drive, which is fantastic. The next number is 1,702. So that's the number of data points that we've collected during the last data drive. So that means we have data from a certain number of countries, a certain number of indicators. It's 1,702 data points. And these data are what enable us to develop the latest SDG 6 progress update, which was the main input document to the PGA high-level meeting on water that was held earlier in this year. And that was the first global water meeting in 44 years. And we used your data to input evidence to that meeting. And then the final number here is 2,146. And that's the number of technical focal points that we have around the world, so working with us on monitoring of SDG 6. That's a big crowd. And we're really happy to have such a large number of very enthusiastic people. Next slide, Maria. So for this workshop is the first session out of 4 that'll be held. This is taking place, of course, now in December, and the next 3 sessions will be in the first week of February next year. This is the kickoff session. But overall, these 4 sessions, we have 4 expected outcomes. So the first one is that we want to bring people together, bring you, the experts, together to talk about what we've learned, what works, what doesn't work, what our questions are. So basically exchanging of practices across colleagues. The second one is as the Integrated Monitoring Initiative is approaching the end of its second phase now, we'd like to get feedback on challenges that you're facing, things that are going well, what you like and don't like about the support that we've provided to you over the past few years, because that will feed into our phase 3 planning. The third outcome is also related to phase 3, and that's identification of needs and priorities for that phase. So, in light of where you think you are now, what sort of help or priorities would you have for the coming years? And then finally, and I'll mention more about this a bit later, We have invited all the focal points to this meeting, to these meetings. So that's the overall focal points and technical focal points. It's important that within countries that these focal points talk to each other. So we see that this workshop is an opportunity for people within countries to know who each other are and to come together and talk about some key questions, which I'll explain a bit later. Next slide, please. So this slide is just showing you the 4 different sessions. As I mentioned, 1 of them is now and 3 of them are in February next year. So this session today is the kickoff session. And so in a minute, we'll have a bit of background on IMI SDG 6, that's the Integrated Monitoring Initiative. Bit of background on what we are, for those of you who don't know us as well as others, so you'll find this interesting, I hope. Then we'll talk about this voluntary country assignment, which is going to be an input into the other 3 sessions taking place in February, but also a chance for country teams to get together and talk about things as a team. That'll be those 2 items are the first 1 hour of today. And then the second 1 hour is a really exciting training on communication using data-driven evidence-based communication presented by a communication specialist from the University of Maryland. So you'll really like this, I know you will. So I hope you stick around for that last part of the session today. And just looking on into February, you can see the other 3 sessions. So the first session, which is on the 8th of February, is stock taking on SDG 6 monitoring to date. So that's where we're going to be looking kind of backwards on the challenges we face and the things that we've learned. We'll have some discussions on kind of how things are working kind of a holistic and an integrated way with different country experts. The second session will be focusing on data for policy and communication. So we getting different examples, different case studies from global to local level of how people are using water and sanitation data to inform policy. We'll also have a chance to get feedback from this external communications expert on some examples of communications tools that countries have been using. And then session 3, the last one, on 10th of February, we'll be looking to the future. So what are the needs and priorities for the future, the 3rd phase of the Integrated Monitoring Initiative, and the future needs of countries. And this will also include a session that we call real-time consulting, which is where countries identify specific topics or specific questions that they want advice on. You know, how do I do this thing? Or, you know, what is your advice regarding this thing? So countries will identify topics, and then they'll have small groups where other countries will advise them on how they would approach these problems. Okay, so that's the global workshop at a glance. So today is the kickoff session. So I'll be focusing on the background and then on this voluntary country assignment, followed by this data communication training. So that wraps up, I believe, the welcome and just the overview of what we're trying to do now. And I'd like to hand the floor over to my colleague, Maria Shada, who's going to tell you about the Integrated Monitoring Initiative. But first, she's going to tell us about some practicalities for the session today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Will. So first of all, thanks so much from my side too. I'm really happy to see so many people here. I'm sure you want to understand what we're saying. So if you need interpretation to French or Spanish, you should please click on this this icon looking like a globe, and there you can select the French or Spanish or even English channel. And the English channel may be useful if there is someone making an intervention in French or Spanish. And then we're of course super happy with this virtual workshop that we can invite so many of you, but we miss the face-to-face interpersonal connections and exchange. We will try our best to make this, and especially the workshop in February, as interactive or as lively as possible. So that's actually, I would want to ask you if your internet connection allows for it, it would be great if you could put on your video camera. And please present yourself in the chat. And also it's very useful if you could name yourself. So the name that you see next to your photo, you can edit it and you could add your name and country to it. So it's easy to know where you're coming from. If you want to take the floor and make an intervention, we have 2 Q&A sessions today. So you're very welcome to do that. And then please turn on your video and your microphone. However, please also remember to mute your microphone if you're not speaking, because we're a lot of people here, and it's very difficult for the interpreters if there's a lot of people speaking at the same time. So that's that. And then I'm sure everyone are excited to know where all the other ones, who all the other ones in this webinar are. So I wanted to stop sharing my screen and I'll launch a poll. That's where I do that, where you can please indicate which region you're from. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. And after that, it would be really great if you, I will call on each of the regions. And when I do so, it would be great if you could turn on your video and perhaps also your microphone and say hi or wave to the others. We will then also make a photo to remember this workshop. So I'll end the poll and I'll share the results. And you can see there's a lot of people from Latin America and the Caribbean, and from Europe and North America, and also a few from the African region. So we also had a session this morning for the others. But yeah, so maybe everyone joining from the Americas, if you would like to put on your video camera and perhaps, I don't know, wave or say hi, we will then make a screenshot. That's great. Thanks, everyone. And then a lot of you. Great. So let's then look to Africa. Could everyone from who's joining us from the African region put on their video? And yeah, say hi or wave. That's nice. It's great to finally get a, sorry. It's great to finally get a face. I've seen many of the names in email conversations over the last years. And then finally, if people from Europe and any other region that I haven't mentioned, if you would please put on your video and say hi, that would be great. That's great. Thanks so much. I hope everyone has a bit better idea who's here today. I'll launch a second poll because we're also curious to know which of the SDG targets that is your favorite. So if you can please respond to the second poll. Give it a few seconds. And then I'll end it now and share the results. So that's great. It's great to see that there's a bit of a mix. We have at least one person liking each of the targets the best. So that's great. Okay, so then I think we are ready to move on to the actual presentation. And as Will mentioned, I'll give you a brief introduction to the work of the United Nations, the joint work of the United Nations to support countries monitor SDG 6 and to report on global progress. And I don't need to introduce the goal to you. I'm sure you're all experts on it. But I wanted to just recall why we're doing all this work. And on this page, I've pasted a few sections from the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The section on follow-up and review, which is something that all the UN member states have committed to do. And the purpose of that process is to track progress, ensure that no one is left behind, promote accountability, exchange best practices, mobilize support. And actually, this is also a good description of the purpose of the global indicators and the reason why we collect this data. And then on the other, on the right-hand side, I think there's shown nicely why countries are responsible to provide data, the great need to raise country capacity in this regard, and also the role of the UN to support countries in their efforts. So just as a background. Moving on. Yeah, that's great. So here you can see the 11 indicators. I'm sure you're very familiar with them too. We also have 8 UN agencies and 2 other international organizations who are responsible to provide methodologies, compile country data, provide support, and to report on global progress. And I'm sure most of you have been in contact with one or more of these organizations during the last few years. Really, so water and sanitation, it's a very cross-cutting issue on the one hand, and on the other hand, it typically involves very many stakeholders. And for that reason, when even before the agenda was adopted, these UN agencies decided to join forces under the UN Water Integrated Monitoring Initiative for SD6 to be able to provide more efficient outreach to be able to more efficiently reach out to countries and to capture synergies. At the national level, we're also trying to promote intersectoral collaboration and integration of data sets. And the work is possible thanks to the generous support of our donors. And while the overarching goal of the initiative of IMI is to accelerate progress towards SD6 by providing evidence base, we have 2 objectives to reach that. And the first one, it's to help countries collect and analyze and report on SD6 data. That's really our core business. The second one, it's to help bring that data to policy and decision makers in a way that makes it easy for them to act on. We have divided the work in 4 phases from 2015 to 2030. The first one focused on establishing a global data baseline for all of the indicators. In the second phase, we have been looking at expanding country capacity and also the reporting, getting more data points. In the third and fourth phase, we will be increasingly looking at integration and the use of data. And then within each phase, we basically have 4 steps, or like 4 years, where we start with preparations and capacity building activities, and then do global data collection, and then continuing with validation and analysis and progress reporting in the 3rd year. And then in the 4th year, we are using these results to feed into various global processes and also to take stock of the work and learn and plan for the subsequent phases. And we're currently in the 2nd phase and in the end of the 3rd year. So that's actually the reason why we're having this workshop in the first place, because it's really to gather your feedback on the work to date. And I think you've also all been contacted by a company named PEM, who's doing an external review of our work. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to encourage you to respond to this survey that they have shared, because it really helps us improve improve the work we do. Last year, as Will mentioned, we had this second data drive, and I think you know a lot about what we did because you were the key players in the data drive. Just to note that it, of course, was a very challenging situation with COVID, and I mean, a lot of you were under lockdown, working from home as far as possible. The UN agencies had to redesign their support, and a lot of the face-to-face activities were replaced with virtual activities. However, what the agencies are telling us is that it's really was a great engagement from all countries, although all these difficulties were there. So that was a very good thing. And then while the agencies worked on their indicator, we also had a number of joint activities. And I just wanted to highlight one, and it's this focal point database, where we have information about the focal points in all countries for all the indicators, or as far as there are any. And this is like, this enables one focal point in one country to learn about who else is working on similar things within his or her country. So that's quite a useful resource, and it's a first step for us to promote this intersectoral collaboration at the country level. And then if we just take a brief look at the results. So as Will mentioned, we're actually quite pleased to see how many data points we were able to get. This map shows how many of the indicators that each country is reporting on. And it's a lot of green, that's good. Of course, we know that there's a lot of huge data gaps still there. And yeah, especially for the indicators that rely on in situ data. So for example, water quality or groundwater data. And we will be discussing this during the workshop in the first day in February. So just to flag that, it's of course one of the most important issues to discuss, the data gaps and what we can do to overcome those. And it's also part of the country assignment that we will tell you more about in a bit. This map, it's coming from the SDG6 data portal. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to show you how you can use the SDG6 data portal to get an overview of all the indicators that your country is reporting on. So this is the interface. You can basically just click on your country. So I'm from Sweden, I click on that country. And you can, if you scroll down, you'll basically get an overview of the indicators that the country is reporting on, or where we have validated data that's been published by the custodian agencies. We have also been publishing a lot of reports this year outlining the current status and the need for acceleration across SDG6. I won't go into any detail here, but I just invite you to look at them and to read them, and also to use this other communications materials that we have developed. In September, we had a series of indicator webinars, which was very well attended, going into a bit more detail on each of the indicators. If you didn't have time to attend those, you can still watch them at your own pace. That's the link there. And then finally, I just wanted to highlight where we're using the data that you have submitted at the global level. So every year there's a request from UNSD to the custodian agencies to provide updated country data to inform the high-level political forum. And then we also have the annual moments of the UN Water Global Acceleration Framework. And then coming up in 2023, it's a very important conference on the midterm review of the International Decade for Action on Water for Sustainable Development. And preceding this conference, it's a very extensive preparatory process with regional and global consultations taking place next year. And that's a really important venue for this data. And of course, in 2023, it's also the next in-depth review of SDG6 at the high-level political forum. So that's just a few examples of where this data will feed. And then I've reached the end of this presentation. I don't know, before I hand over to Will to present the country assignment, are there any questions from the floor? Please just raise your hand if you have any questions. I'm not seeing any hands for the moment, so I think, Will, I will then hand over to you.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Maria. Yes, and if you do have any questions, you can always ask them when I'm done presenting this next bit as well. So, okay, I will share my screen.
There is actually a question.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
Sí, disculpen. Quería comentar que yo soy de Uruguay, del Ministerio de Ambiente, y a veces puede estar pasando que hay algunos datos que los indicadores, los resultados, digamos, que no llegan. Entonces capaz que está bueno en este seminario poder estar en conocimiento de todos los pasos, porque a nosotros nos pasa que nosotros reportamos, tenemos todo un proceso bastante aceitado a lo que es el Instituto Nacional de Estadística. Digo porque, bueno, Uruguay quedó en rojo, pero nosotros calculamos todos los indicadores de ODS, así que, bueno, en eso nos quedamos a disposición, incluso los que estamos acá del Ministerio, conectados, para mejorar esa información. Así que, bueno, muchas gracias.
Yeah, thanks. So it's a good point, and I don't know if you have if there's a specific indicator that you're thinking about, because we do have a few custodian agencies here that can explain. It's usually the validation process.
Sí, yo estoy coordinando eso, los ODS a la interna, digamos, tenemos todo un montón de equipos que trabajan para cada indicador, para construirlos. En general es el Ministerio de Ambiente, los relacionados con agua. Y estamos en contacto con las agencias. A veces pasan esas cosas, que bueno, que capaz que el reporte quedó más a nivel local y no que se generó en el informe. Nomás quería comentar eso, que estamos a disposición para actualizarlo, y en red trabajamos acá, y bueno, y en el próximo informe, o si se puede ir mejorando los datos, eso, quedamos a disposición para hacerlo. Así que muchas gracias.
That's good. No, but so we will then follow up with you after this webinar, and we can see for each of the indicators, you know, why the data aren't showing up in the final data portal. But that's good. Thanks. And sorry, back to you, Will.
Great. Okay. So yes, I will share my screen now. Can you see this? Yes. I assume that means yes.
Yes.
Okay, so for this next part of the session today, then I'd like to tell you a little bit about this voluntary assignment. Voluntary means you don't have to do it, but I think it'd be really great if as many countries as possible do try to do this. And the idea is that, as I mentioned already, within a country, there is a number of focal points that the UN agencies and ourselves have already been in touch with. And the idea is that these focal points could get together and discuss a small number of questions that that I'll be showing you in a minute. But before we do that, I'd actually have to share a couple of slides with you about this idea of a country monitoring team, because in some countries, this is an institution that actually exists. It has can have a very formal mandate and a very strong identity. In other countries, it's actually quite informal. And of course, in quite a few countries, still, this team doesn't really exist at all. The different focal points don't know each other, and they may never have even gotten together at all. So I'd like to say a few words about these country monitoring teams. So this slide highlights kind of three different categories of people that we interact with in the countries. So the first one are indicator-specific technical focal points. Okay, we call these TFPs sometimes, technical focal points. These are technical experts in a country whose job involves working with data in some form related to one specific indicator, or sometimes more than one of these global indicators. These are the people that the UN agencies, when they do their data collection, will be interacting with. And these are the people who have also been the target of capacity building from the different UN custodian agencies. So as I mentioned in my very first slide, we have over 2,000 of these technical focal points that we are aware of. And as you can imagine, keeping on top of all those names is a bit of a challenge because it changes a lot. But those are our main audience in countries. But in addition to the technical focal points, there's a National Statistics Office in every country. So this is the organization that has the official mandate from the United Nations to report the data to the UN. And until the NSO approves data, it's not supposed to be used by the United Nations. So they're kind of like the quality control and approval mechanism for the data coming from the technical focal points. And then we have this thing called the overall focal point. This is a person, or sometimes more than one person, who have taken on this role to just coordinate this process across the different other focal points, because in some cases there can be a lot of people involved. And it's one thing to provide data on a kind of indicator by indicator basis, but there's a lot of value to be had by looking at it holistically, looking at all the indicators together. It enables you to make much more informed and balanced and comprehensive policies. So that's an area that this initiative, which is why we're called the Integrated Monitoring Initiative. We like to see countries over time do more and more of this integrated data collection, integrated analysis, integrated policy making using these data. And the overall focal point has a role trying to coordinate this amongst all the different stakeholders in their country. Now, this OFP can actually be from any ministry. And what we find is because there actually in most countries isn't a single ministry that's responsible for everything of water and sanitation. It can be quite different. So sometimes it's Ministry of Water Resources, sometimes it's environment, sometimes it's health, it can be energy, it can be industry, it can be anywhere. So that really is a decision that the country has to make, who makes sense to be the overall coordinator of this. But it's important to note that the overall focal point usually does not have any official management authority over the other focal points. It's more of a voluntary coordination that they're doing. So yes, those are the main players that we see. This slide here kind of shows how we, as the Integrated Monitoring Initiative, interact with these different focal points. So if you look at, let's say, look at the pink rectangles. So each of those represents the people in a country working on a particular indicator. So in this example, there's 3 global indicators, but of course, there, as we mentioned, there's actually 11. So you'd have 11 of these boxes. The bottom part of the rectangle is referring to all the different people who have any role in gathering that data. And there can be dozens of people involved. It may be different technical experts or different parts of the country. It may be government people, or may also be civil society or academia. A range of stakeholders may have a role in a particular indicator. But at the top of that rectangle, that's where you see the technical focal point for that indicator. So that's one or more people who are actually the interface between all the people involved in generating the data and then the UN agencies who are kind of the custodians for that data. And that's why you see that line going from the technical focal point box to the left, which is where the custodian agencies, the UN agencies are. Okay, so the UN agencies deal with the technical focal points. But then if you look in the green box, the big green box, that's where the overall focal point is. So that's the person who's aiming to coordinate all of this within a country. And within the UN, it's myself and Maria who are the ones usually dealing with the overall focal points. Okay, so that's also part of the Integrated Monitoring Initiative. And then on the right, you see that's where the National Statistics Office is. Now, as I mentioned, the National Statistics Office, they're responsible for doing quality control and approval of all the data coming from the different focal points. And then if you look at the technical focal points and the overall focal point and the NSO in that big green box, that is what we're calling the country monitoring team. As I mentioned, this is something that exists in our heads, and in some countries it is fairly well established, but it really varies a lot. So some countries have a strong country monitoring team, and some countries really don't have any team yet. So moving on to the next slide. Oh, sorry, yes. And just as a reminder, kind of the overall reason that we're looking at this kind of holistic intersectoral approach is that we are aiming for a situation where we have integrated monitoring processes in countries, where cross-sectoral coordination and collaboration improves the availability, accessibility, and integrated analysis of high-quality data for policy and decision-making. Okay, and this final slide here showing why that's important. So you may have seen this before because this is our favorite slide. We use it in many presentations. But on the left, you have good data. You see each column there is a number of data points. Different shapes represent different indicators, but there's some organization to that. But the problem is that they're separate. They're in silos. Whereas on the right side, you see that you can actually rearrange those same polygons into a bigger picture that actually has a lot of meaning to it. In this case, it looks like a duck. But that's the value of having integrated information. It gives you a more comprehensive and meaningful picture of what the data are telling us. And that is what we're aiming for with integrated monitoring. So why am I telling you all of this? Because what we see this voluntary exercise that's feeding into the 3 sessions in February as an opportunity for these country monitoring teams to get together and look at a few questions. It'll be easier for some, hard for some others, but we'd love it if you give this a try. So now for the next slides, I'm going to tell you a bit about the assignment. So first is this slide here is just telling you this is not the first time we've done this. And in fact, during the first global workshop in 2017, we asked countries on a voluntary basis if they wanted to generate country posters. So here you can see some snaps of a few of the country posters that were created. And those posters required pulling together all the data into one place. So the bottom part of each poster is the actual data values. But then the top part is some descriptions and some lessons and some challenges and some overall analyses of the data, kind of looking across the different indicators, this kind of intersectoral analysis. So we've done this before at the face-to-face workshop in The Hague. This year, we're trying to do something kind of similar in that we want the country teams to convene and answer some questions. So you're not generating posters, but you're answering some questions. So these are the questions. But first, actually, this is the process. So what we would suggest if you decide to do this in your country is first you get together with the other focal points in your country. And we've already reached out to each country for whom we have focal points individually and shared the names of the other people, the other focal points that we have in our database, admitting very frankly that some of those names are out of date. but it's a starting point if you want to convene a group. So we've shared those names, and we'd suggest that you reach out to each other and try to get together. You should schedule a meeting. That meeting can either be very short, probably, I think you could probably do it in 1 hour as a virtual meeting if you want, or if you're more ambitious, you can get people together physically, pandemic permitting, but and spend more time. You can spend a whole day talking about these if you wanted. But this is really an opportunity to kind of operationalize this country monitoring team. And then during that meeting, in preparation for that meeting, we would suggest that the different focal points might look at the questions, come up with their own answers to that, so that when they get together, they're prepared to discuss these questions. And then what we'd suggest as an output of this is that you write the answers to your questions in the PowerPoint template that we shared. It's right there in the template. That's just very simple. Write the answers, and then you can send that to us. And the email address is right there on that slide. And the idea then is that we can use these answers to inform the sessions that are in the February workshop. Capture some great examples from countries perhaps, but this will also be useful for us in other ways for our website and for other sorts of analysis that we're doing. A couple of the questions are actually related to our phase 3 planning, so that will be really useful for us. But generally we see that this homework assignment feeds into the workshop. So here, the next 3 or 4 slides are the questions themselves, and I'll just quickly walk through them. So the first question is about the experience to date on SDG6 monitoring. So the instructions are to please reflect on the work that you've done on SDG6 monitoring during the last few years. And you might want to think of some of these possible questions that are below. These are just suggested. The questions aren't required. You can talk about some of them or talk about some other things if you want, but sort of things that we're thinking of are: how did you organize data collection? Which organizations were involved? How did you discuss the work amongst focal points? Did you report data? Where are your data gaps? What are your thoughts about the reporting process in general, about the data collection process, the analysis process? Has this been of value to you at the national level? A lot of you have received support from the UN. What did you think of that support? Which sort of tools were the most useful for you? What challenges have you encountered? Things like that. Okay, so that's the first question. The second one is about the usefulness of data for policy. So the request here is that you reflect on how the collected data and analysis are used for policymaking and other purposes at various levels within your country. So you might want to think about the different uses of data, for example, raising awareness, advocacy, fundraising, at different levels, local level, national level, and so on. Which policy processes are benefiting most from the data? Which type of analysis are you doing? Who are you sharing data with? What are the main challenges you're facing on data for policy? Okay, and data for policy is going to be a big focus on the Integrated Monitoring Initiative in the next phase. And for that reason, that's part of our sessions in February. The third question then is about the needs and priorities for the future. So what are you doing about data gaps? What are areas that you see for improvement? What are specific indicator specific needs you may have, and which things are actually more cross-cutting needs for all indicators? What kind of support do you need in the future? Okay, so those are the 3 main questions that we'd like the groups to discuss. But there's a 4th bonus question, and that is, we're really interested to see about communications. And when I finish up here, the next part of this session today is going to be about communications with data. And you'll see some exciting ideas about how best to do that. So what we would be interested also, if you have the time in your groups, is to gather some examples from you on what sort of communications you're doing with the data. If you have any documents or any images or graphics or anything like that you wish to share with us that you think are particularly good examples of communication with data, or if something that you actually think is pretty bad and you want to share it as a negative example or a lesson that you've learned, we'd be interested in seeing some of these. And we'll be having a small part of the third session in February with the communications expert giving feedback on some of these examples. So we can actually learn from each other on what's good communication and maybe what's not so good. Okay, so the voluntary assignment then is those 3 questions and this optional thing on communicating data. And that's it. That's all I want to say about the voluntary assignment. So I think this assignment is actually, interesting on 2 levels. One is the questions themselves, but the other one is the actual convening of this country monitoring team and how that works. So if you have any questions on either of those things, on the actual technical questions or on the country monitoring team functioning, we'd be happy to help you with those. And of course, if you have any questions right now, that's the next step, is I would open the floor for question and answer. Thanks. So the floor is open. If you have any questions, feel free, please raise your hand and we can call. So I see Peter Mahel from, just a second, I can't see your thing. Peter, go ahead. You may need to unmute. Yep. Peter?
Yeah, thank you, Will and Mary. The 2 presentations are very informative. These are the first time to attend this kind of meeting with you and online, though we have been struggling with the support from Paul sometimes back to come on board and give our data of South Sudan. Yeah, mine is, it seems like when we are talking of lead focal points, we sometimes get names sent to us without us knowing who is the focal point for what. We get the list in country. So we need, my question is, we need the lead, like you now, you are coordinating this activity. We need in country, all of our countries, not necessarily South Sudan alone. We need in country to know who is coordinating this data collection in all aspects. They want coordinating it so that the UN body that is coordinating these activities should be the one making the efforts to bring the focal points together. I know we can start making such kind of activity, which we have been doing, and on ad hoc basis, on voluntary basis, as you said. We just try to move based on our functions and mandates of the government ministries, and we try to move. But if something comes officially coordinated by the in-country UN body, would be more meaningful to bring on board the institutions that are working towards achieving the data collection for the benefits of the planning of all. So that is the question I want to raise regarding who is coordinating this data collection officially from the UN bodies in South Sudan. That's one. Number 2, this is actually leading to this picture you have given us, the clear picture of the duck. That is important for us to read the duck's picture. It has to be coordinated in country by the UN body, because some institution will say, I am doing this, and the other institution will say, I'm doing this. So there will be some kind of overlap. It has to be delineated. And I think that is what I wanted to mention briefly. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. So yes, maybe I'll respond to a couple of your points. The identification and kind of like the management of all these different focal point names is one of the biggest challenges that we face, because it is always changing, and people come and go and change ministries, and of course in some countries they really don't know each other. So that's something that we spend a lot of time on, but we're not perfect either. Generally, the custodian agencies, the UN agencies, have their own ways of getting focal point contacts that have gone back sometimes a number of years. So they're the ones who kind of provide the initial names that go into our database. But it's a challenge for them to keep on top of it. But also, ultimately, it's the countries themselves who really need to be identifying who the right people are. It should not be driven from the UN. It's just, we just want to try to record and organize the names. We can play a role sometimes helping to identify if you think that is useful, but we're very careful not to interfere with how the countries choose people. But we're also really well aware of the politics within countries on who does what. And you can actually, it's a sad reality that two different people, equally qualified, measuring the same indicator, using the same methodology, may come up with slightly different estimates. So it really can be quite complicated. But that's why we would really encourage that the country should empower itself to organize this thing and have an overall focal person who can try to manage this process as best as possible. But it can be really tricky. It can be really tricky getting that mandate from your colleagues in the other ministries who are willing to work together. I mean, that's half the challenge. I'm not sure if you were asking specifically who the names are. You should have, because Peter, I know you're the overall focal point for South Sudan. You should have received from us a list, people that, and that has their names, that has which indicator they're focal point for. That should be your initial tool for knowing who to reach out to. So maybe I misunderstood your question on that, but if you don't have that, we can definitely get it to you. Thanks. More questions, please.
Yeah, I have the list. Yeah, I have the list.
Okay.
The initial engagement of different focal points is what I was concerned about, because we got sometimes different names for different indicators. We will put it right, but I'm giving the experience that I have, and definitely will be with other countries.
Thanks. No, it is indeed, it's complicated. That's for certain. Okay, I hear silence. I have 7 more minutes to fill before we hand this over to the next presenter. So I have 7 minutes of questions, please. So I see we have a comment in the chat box from Kana saying the National Statistics Office is ready to collaborate with the relevant stakeholder institutions and agencies, to which some engagements are already ongoing. That's fantastic. And we've worked with Ghana, so I know that you're doing a great job on this. I should also mention that as I said, the overall focal point there's no right or wrong ministry for it to come from, but we find that often that if it comes from kind of a central ministry, like the National Statistics Office or the Planning Commission or the President's Office, some kind of more central one, they find that they may have a stronger or an easier position to work with other ministries. Whereas if it's from a particular line ministry, it sometimes gets a bit less clear. Do I see any more questions? Any more hands up? No, well, if not, that's fine. So you are still welcome to reach out to us at the email address monitoring@unwater.org if you have any questions about the country monitoring teams or about the assignment. And as I said, it is voluntary. You can still come to the February workshop if you haven't done it. No one's going to grade your assignment. But I just think it would be a worthwhile exercise, and we would definitely benefit from it in terms of what we're trying to do in the integrated monitoring initiative. So if there's no other questions, then I'd like to move us on to the next next topic, which is the I feel better if I share my screen.
Sorry, Will, there was
Yes.
a request from Cuba to take the floor.
Oh, was there? I'm sorry, I missed that. Cuba, you have the floor. Cuba, did you want to intervene? Okay. Well, okay, maybe Cuba's changed their mind. Any case, you're definitely free to follow up with us separately after this. Yeah, it's a question from Marcela in Brazil. What is the format of presenting the results? So it's whatever format you want. We suggested doing it in the PowerPoint slides, but if you want to do it in a Word document or even make a some small report out of it, that's up to you. Is really what works best for you. Okay, so I will just put my screen back up. So for this next session, then I would like to invite, sorry, I'm just moving this out of the way. Yes, so for this next part is going to be a session on using data. Sorry, I'm making a real mess out of this. Yes, so we're going to be talking, it's a mini training and is on the use of data for effective communications. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Vanessa Vargas-Nguyen, who comes from the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. So for the next 1 hour, she's going to walk us through this very interesting training on communication using scientific data. Vanessa, over to you.
Right. Thank you, Will. I hope you guys are sharing my screen. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world right now. It's my pleasure to be here with you today to talk about integrating narratives and visuals to help you communicate your data more effectively. So in this session, my goal is not only to share with you some basic principles and tools on how you can communicate your data or your work more effectively, but more importantly, I want to impart with you and share some insights on why is it important in developing environmental intelligence and environmental problem solving. And I'll start this presentation by sharing my own personal and professional experience and how I became very passionate about science communication and stakeholder engagement. And we'll also introduce our group, the Integration and Application Network, which is a small organization that is part of the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. So I am originally from the Philippines. I started my career in basic science and research. I've always been passionate about the environment. I was a marine scientist working on harmful algal blooms and microbial communities. I've always believed that more science, maybe from more technology, more research, will be able to solve environmental problems. But then when I moved to the US, we do have the same issues here. And it's not always about the technology or the lack thereof. The biggest commonality is the lack of effective science communication and integration. And this idea is really enforced by the fact that environmental problems are social issues and that everything is connected. And what becomes really important is managing boundaries, which could be sectoral, organizational, or geographical boundaries, while creating information that is salient, credible, and legitimate. What is needed are communication strategies that are stakeholder-driven and consider both scientific information and the human perspective. One such tools are report cards. That's what we do to integrate data at the Integration Application Network, such as this Laguna de Bay Ecosystem Health Report Card that is actually funded through a project funded by the UNDP that I helped develop as part of the Integration and Application Network, or IAN. I've been with IAN now in various capacities for nearly 7 years, and we've been referred to as boundary spanning organizations. We specialize in science communication and synthesis, social environmental report card development, stakeholder engagement, capacity building, and training. We also teach professional and graduate courses. One of my ongoing projects is the development of massive open online courses. So we offer a professional certificate course in the edX platform. The good thing about MOOCs is that all of these courses are free to audit and they are all self-paced. So if you're interested in learning more about communication and storytelling with data, you can go into the edX platform and take these courses for free. So our group's motto is to communicate better to empower change. And we advocate that through the development of environmental intelligence, which we define as the ability to acquire and apply environmental knowledge. The key to our application of the term is that it is the collective understanding that the community shares about the environment. We can visualize environmental intelligence in the form of a pyramid. At the base of this pyramid is the data gathering, which you've all been doing. And the next layer is information gathering. This is where synthesis and integration efforts are done to convert data into usable information. The next layer is knowledge building, which is facilitated by science communication through conceptual diagrams and data visualization techniques, which I will share and touch on in this presentation.
Yeah, I'm listening. Sorry, let me make sure.
Sorry, okay. At the top of this pyramid is communicating good science effectively in a timely manner is what creates this environmental intelligence. So putting together this pyramid, you can see that the degree of information synthesis occurs with each increasing layer. And in order to achieve broad community knowledge, this communication needs to extend beyond the scientific literature or technical reports to be more accessible. Example of this is the environmental report cards that I mentioned earlier that synthesize and integrate data and communicates it in a meaningful way. So it has been used increasingly globally, and here are just some of the examples of report cards that we at IAN help develop all over the world. And report cards do increase environmental intelligence. From my research, report card practitioners strongly agreed that their report card increased public awareness, public education, political awareness, and demand for additional information. But report cards are more than a science communication product. The process of developing them is a great tool for stakeholder engagement and social environmental synthesis. If we take a social environmental system, which we are all a part of, we have the resource system and a governance system, and they interact in this focal action situation. We need to consider both the environment or the natural world, but we also need to consider the social system or the human dimension. And more importantly, we need stakeholder input. And the key principle that is needed to pull all this together is communication and engagement. Currently, my interest in social environmental problem solving through teaching and capacity building, which I already mentioned previously, and social environmental governance, where I'm coordinating a project that involves the US, Philippines, Norway, India, and Japan. for the goal of socio-environmental problem solving, which I know that we all share. Both science communication and stakeholder engagement is needed. The degree of stakeholder interaction depends on the complexity of issues, but what is consistently needed in all these types of engagement, be it outreach, collaboration, or co-production, is effective science communication. And I've been talking about science communication, but what is it really? If you look up the Wikipedia definition of it, it is the practice of informing, educating, sharing, the wonderment in raising awareness of science-related topics. According to Burns in a research published in 2003, it is the use of appropriate skills, media, activities, and dialogues to produce awareness, enjoyment, interest, opinion forming, and or understanding of science. At Ian, we have a more functional definition, which is simply the successful dissemination of knowledge with a wide range of audience. And the most important goal in communicating science is simply effectiveness. And to achieve this, we have to first ask ourselves, who are we communicating with? Who are our audience, our stakeholders? This is very important. This is very important because even though the data and the monitoring results are the same, how you communicate them can vary depending on your audience. So when designing our communication strategies, it is very important that we stop asking ourselves, what do I want to say? And start asking ourselves, what do I need my audience to learn? And we can convey this information more effectively by using stories and visualizations. Humans have been telling stories before the written words, and ancient people drew pictures as far back as 40,000 years ago. And it's not only that storytelling and visualizations are the most ancient forms of human communication, but our brains are actually hardwired to respond to stories and to visualizations. Effective science communication taps into the limbic system, or our emotional brain, which affects our emotion, behavior, motivation, long-term memory, and it also affects the neocortex, or our thinking brain, which is related to our sensory perception, cognition, spatial reasoning, and language. It is also important for us to think about and differentiate between the why and the what. Why addresses motivation and emotional content, and it goes to long-term memory. The what question addresses cognitive and rational basis for an argument. So both of these questions are important to address when we communicate. So with this knowledge in mind, ask yourself, who are you communicating with? So I would like you to share your answer with us by using the link that I will put on the link on the chat. And if you are using another device, such as your cell phone or iPad, go to a browser and go to menti.com and use the code 2386 and 1315. So you should be able to see this question, who are you communicating with? Please use 1 to 2 words. Right, so we have stakeholders, public, supervisors, so far politicians, citizens, civil society, lawyers, that's a very specific one, decision makers, ministers. You can see that they're very diverse type of audience, and it's very challenging to create a communication strategy that can communicate with these different stakeholders. So it's great that one of the most common answers here is the public decision makers and researchers. So in investigator, public institution clients, students, that's a good one as well. Civil society. So the top three answers, it seems, are stakeholders, the public, and decision makers. So I will move on. So thank you so much for the answers. I will move on to the next question, which is, so just please go to the next slide if you're using your device. The next question is, what do your audience need to learn? So this is a short answer type of question. So a sentence would be, or a phrase would suffice. So think about, what do your audience need to learn? So we have investment priorities, good. Reliable data, that's very important. And I guess communicating them more effectively would really lend itself to that. How to prioritize available funds, indicators, data, ecosystem health and climate solutions. I assume it's quality of data. And inequal distributions, how it benefits them, it's very important. The why question. What data are actually available? So identifying what data are available and also knowledge gaps. Inversion, different water scenarios, clear definitions, gaps I mentioned, water availability and service quality, how problems could be solved. That's very important to think about as well. How these are useful to them, and employment level, status, and change of issues. So great, thank you for your answers. Water quality services, thanks. And so thank you for all your participation. We have 2 or 3 more Menti activities, so please keep it open. Summarizing some of the science communication basics. First, science communication is the successful dissemination of knowledge to a wide range of audience. Second, the goal is effectiveness. Third, we need to ask ourselves, what do I need my audience to learn, not what I need to tell them? And finally, our human brains are hardwired for visuals, and the why and what affects our emotional brain and thinking brain, respectively. So as I mentioned previously, stories are powerful communication device. They are also more engaging and interesting than a string of facts. So in using narratives in science communication, I will share some basic principles. First, context is key. Address why your audience should care. I mentioned that effective science communication taps into the limbic system and the neocortex, and we need to address both the what and the why question. However, as scientists and technical experts, we often start with the what, then the how, and the why, which may not always be effective. Ideally, we should go the other way. And the primacy of addressing the why question is that it gets to the limbic brain where our emotion and behavioral aspects are controlled. And the what question gets to the neocortex or our analytical brain. So going more into this manner is more effective. Second, active titles can help guide the audience and link with visuals. Active titles are short declarative statements that summarize key messages. If written effectively, the audience should only need to read the active title and the rest of the slide to understand the primary message. Verbs that describe the results of a graph, map, or picture are typically used. In the example here, in the second example below, seagrass and sediment characteristics were recorded is far more informative than just saying methods as the title of your slide or your presentation. Ultimately, combining active titles with strong visual elements lead to a more persuasive science communication product. Third, I want to talk about a narrative structure that we like to teach, and this is the ABT structure. So this is popularized by Randy Olson, who is a scientist and filmmaker who has published 2 important books on narrative structure, which is Houston, We Have a Narrative, Why Science Needs Story, published. He defined 3 kinds of narrative: the AAA narrative structure, which is a series of statements linked by end, which can be boring and a repetitive way of speaking. The DHY structure, or despite, however, yet narrative structure, can become very confusing and overly narrative. So the preferred structure is the and but therefore, which leads itself more to a narrative. The ABT structure provides agreement using the end, which is the setup that we can all agree on, the contradiction or the but, which is the problem, what we are confronting, and finally, the consequences, the therefore, which are the actions that are being taken or could be the solution itself. This is an example of the use of an ABT structure to describe one of the projects funded by the Development Forum to address coastal vulnerability. So you can see the opening sentence starts with a description of the risk level of megacities globally. The project is about assessing vulnerability in coastal megacities. So they start the statement with the description of that and followed it up with a problem that the risk managers in this city faces. And then they conclude the statement with a statement on how their project is addressing the issue. Another example is this statement describing the proximity to water treatment plant as a potential environmental justice indicator that is written by one of my students in a class that I taught the previous semester. She started the statement by describing what water treatment plants are and followed it up with different ways on how they can be harmful and how they tend to be located near marginalized communities. And then she ended the statement here with a therefore on why this indicator could be, on how they could be used for environmental justice. So the next principle is that storytelling can be powerful tools, and they can be powerful science communication device for 3 reasons. First, they engage the audiences far more, they engage the audience and they're far more interesting than the string of facts. They improve retention because they're easy to remember. And finally, they shorten the reading time to audience. A reader can quickly and easily follow a storyline with more effective comprehension. So what makes a good story? One thing that makes a good story is causality. We need to establish a cause and effect relationship. Another key element in a story is temporality, which is having a timeline with a beginning, a middle, and the end. The other thing that good stories share is that they have people involved. The problem with science and how we communicate them is that we often just focus on the data and the facts, and we leave out the people part. Finally, stories need to be more relevant to the audience. And so this is how involving the people more can really connect with your audience. So it's really important that your story makes a connection to your audience. So the hero is a common template of stories, and a lot of storylines in movie follow this hero's journey, where it involves a hero who goes on an adventure and is victorious in a decisive crisis and comes home changed or transformed. The process of creating a story out of scientific materials required that scientists distill information into a product that has a message, a story that is easy to follow, well organized, speaks to the values of the audience, and is pleasurable experience. In other words, stories can make science accessible. One effective tool to organize effective science communication is called the message box. A workbook is available online from the Compass Science Communication group that can guide you through this process. So just quickly, so if you follow this message box, you can basically make a story out of your research. So inside, you can describe the issue that you're focusing on, starting in, and then going out to the top, you list the problems. What are your findings that makes you want to communicate and why it affects people? Moving clockwise, briefly answer the so what question. What does your audience value? How are they impacted? Why should they care? And why is it that you are communicating important to them? At the bottom, list the potential solutions, what changes can be made and by whom, and how it would solve the problem. Finally, to the left, list all the benefits from the solutions, both short-term and long-term. Finally, we all know this, and just simply that we need to simplify our communication and define terms. It's easily said than done, but we need to avoid jargon, but we don't necessarily have to dumb it down, but instead raise the bar. So it is harder to simplify your research, your data without, we think, distilling the information and removing relevant information. So simplifying things actually is harder because you really need to think about what you wanted to tell your audience. All right, so again, okay, so we move to an activity. So if you may please go to back to Menti, and I will put the link into the chat, and we'll do a little ABT exercise. So I'll start the statement with the end, and please provide the but or the challenges. Increasing wastewater treatment and improving water sanitation is important, but so if you can identify challenges and list them down on the Mentimeter in 2 to 3 words. Right, so we have here financial constraints. They're very costly, and it's not a political priority. There's a lot of challenges such as antimicrobial resistance. When we need quality data to do that, there's also climate change. Funding is expensive, data gaps, right? Collaboration is needed, more understanding, and it could be undesirable. So as you can see on that statement by my student about how it can actually affect, if you live near wastewater treatment plants, the health of communities. All right, so thank you all for your participation again. To summarize the section on using narratives in science communication, remember, context is key. We should address the why question, why your audience should care. Using active titles can help guide the audience and link to visuals. Narrative structure should follow the ABT template. Storytelling using cause and effect, timeline, and people can be a powerful tool. And simplify and define terms, avoid jargon, scientific jargons, but do not dumb it down. Instead, raise the bar. So next, using visual in science communication can be very effective because as humans, we are visual creatures. So here are some examples. Here are some principles in using visuals in our science communication. First, there is a diversity of visual elements that we can use for science communication. But remember that developing them deserve as much time and effort as developing your text. Some of the commonly used visuals are photographs, maps, and graphs. The key here, though, and it goes for all visual elements, is that we have to make sure that you have the proper attribution before using them, that you can actually use them in your report, in your presentation. At EN, what we commonly use are symbols, which are easily recognized and information rich. We have an EN symbols library that is free to download from our website. And we like symbols because symbols are language independent and they are universal. They can also represent something tangible, like a book or a building, and also something invisible, like the wind, or intangible things like emotions. Nowadays in our daily life, we even use icons or emojis to communicate. Another form of visual element is a conceptual diagram, which is a thought drawing that can be used to communicate complicated processes and environmental concepts in a simple and easy to digest format. For example, this is a conceptual diagram illustrating a modern central collection and waste treatment plant. It is easily understandable even for non-engineers or scientists. And this is also where we use the use of symbols can be very helpful. So videos are another form of visuals, and they are great because they can convey a lot of information in a short amount of time, and you can reuse them too. So I will reuse a short clip from our online science communication course to explain the third principle in using visuals, which is eliminating extraneous information or chart junk. So I'll just have to make sure that I'm sharing this sound. Okay, good.
I want to talk about chart junk, which can be defined as all visual elements in charts or graphs that are not necessary to comprehend the information represented on the graph, and that distract the viewer from this information. I'll go through an example of a science visualization that has a lot of chart junk and how removing extraneous information can help make the visualization more effective. Starting out, a spreadsheet output of a bar chart with monthly rainfall is produced. A series of questions are posed. Is the background color necessary? If not, you can remove it. Second, are the grid lines necessary? If not, take them out. Are tick marks on the axes important? Tick marks are often important, but in this graph, the month is written below each bar, so the tick marks don't really add any value. Does a legend provide additional information? The legend only duplicates the labels on the x-axis, thus it's redundant. And since the graph provides the values, do they need to be written out? The viewer can read across the road to determine the value of the y-axis without the need of writing that figure down. And the border around the graph, is that necessary? The axes are crucial, but putting the whole graphic into a box isn't needed. So using these questions as a guide, this graphic can be significantly decluttered and improved.
All right, so the next principle is to take into consideration our cognitive response to visuals. There are many aspects of a visual element, but for now, I'll just talk more specifically about colors. For instance, in this graphic, we use the universal stoplight color of red to stop, orange to wait, and green to go to indicate increasing risk. So notice the varying levels of red. Of course, there are other considerations such as color blindness that we have to think about as well in using colors in our science communication. The next principle is that making our visual as self-contained as possible, like this conceptual diagram, where the symbols are embedded in the caption, is preferred. You don't need to read the entire text or find it, the description and the text to understand what this diagram is actually saying. Lastly, visuals need to be fully integrated with the text. In developing science communication products, we want to be as concise as possible. No matter how good a visual element is, if it doesn't add to your story, then it's just another form of clutter. So we have to make sure that whatever visual you add, you refer that back in your text. Otherwise, just don't include them. So let's go back to the Menti, and I have a question here on what are the challenges in incorporating visuals. So again, this is a short answer type of question. So if you can think about what are the challenges in incorporating visuals and share it with us. And if you don't have access to Menti, and I'm sorry I forgot to mention this, but please don't hesitate to put them on the chat and I can include them for you. So I'll give it a few minutes for answers to pop in. So the first one here is takes loads of time. Yes, so I mentioned that in the beginning, is that we have to give them as much time thinking about it and developing them as when we write our text. Expressing the right message is very time consuming to generate. Yes, technical knowledge, having reliable data, access to software. That's also a challenge that we found working with other groups. Sometimes we use proprietary softwares that not everyone has access to. Color blindness, yes, that's also a very important consideration. Accessibility requires good design. Yeah, design is, you can't just pick some random design. It has to really contribute to your story as well. Being able to visuals to be simple but effective, needs external expertise to do it well. In the next segment, I'll show a video on how you can do it as well, even in just as simply as Excel, thinking about cleaning up your graphs. And necessitating someone who does it. Yes, so editing document is not a field of expertise for scientists. We have to learn this. That's a lot too. In our group, we all have science background that learn science communication, because we found that it's easier that way instead of graphic artists learning science, scientists learning how to do it is actually more effective because you know your material. So you know the best way on how you can communicate and explain them. Image rights, that's very important. Grabbing photos from the internet doesn't work. So we have to make sure that we have the rights to use images. Yep. All right, so thank you all again. Just to quickly summarize the use of visuals in science communication. Diversity of visual elements enhances science communication. Eliminating extraneous information or chart junk or map clutter is important. Cognitive response to visual is an important consideration. Self-contained visuals with supporting information are preferred. And finally, visuals need to be fully integrated with the text. So in the next few slides, I will talk about specific tools that you can use in communicating your data. First is data visualization. And I will again play a short clip about some important consideration in data visualization.
The goal and rationale for data visualization is to communicate information both clearly and efficiently. You can use a variety of different graphs and plots and information graphs and tables and charts and maps to communicate information. An effective visualization helps you uncover trends, realize insights, explore sources, and ultimately tell stories. Effective science communication using visualization can make complex data more accessible, more understandable, and ultimately more usable. There are a myriad of choices for data visualization. There are XY graphs and tables and pie charts and bar graphs and Venn diagrams and timelines and scatter plots, bubble diagrams, histograms, area charts, and more. There are combinations of data graphs with maps and with conceptual diagrams and with photographs. The real challenge is to choose the appropriate visualization for the data that you're communicating. Good data visualization combines function and form. In terms of function, this is about choosing the visualization type that best conveys the characteristics of the data. Then the form is when you apply color and choose your fonts and other design elements to help guide the user to help make your data understandable. Here are some examples. 1. The functional output is a bar graph of some responses to treatments, and the form is applied to simplify the color scheme, match the color intensities to the treatment temperature, and declutter the graphics, adding an active title and a symbol of the species being assessed. Second example is a functional output of an XY graph, seasonality of 2 different seagrasses. The form is when you add the colors and symbols, increase the font size of the legends, and include an active title. Third example is a pie chart of land use, initially generated with different land use types that are kind of obfuscated because it's obliquely angled. It's colorful, but it doesn't give you information. So rather a bar graph with actual percentages of land uses are displayed. 4, tables also need careful formatting and attention to detail. A table with several treatments over a time course doesn't provide much information without significant accompanying explanation. So what you can do is create better descriptions, defining the error bars, using alignment rather than color banding, creating a table that has much more explanatory power. It's cleaner and it's easier to read. From these examples, you can see that combining function and form leads to a better data visualization graphic. Most data visualizations are created using an iterative process. You can start out with a simple printout of a data table that comes from a spreadsheet. This table without any formatting is difficult to interpret. Some simple formatting by centering the data in the column headers helps, but what really makes this table work is when it's decluttered by removing all vertical lines and most of the horizontal lines, and allowing the alignment to serve as guides to the rows and columns. The locations are spelled out, and instead of using abbreviations, use a symbol for each organism to make it easy to quickly understand what it is. That resulting table is more compelling and more self-explanatory than the initial spreadsheet-generated version.
So visualizations can also be an effective way to communicate or present qualitative data. In this example, I created a visualization of what a sustainable future Chesapeake Bay should look like based on interviews with key stakeholders. Note the use of active statements and images to convey specific key points. I also use animation to present the results because I'm showing this as a part of a presentation, and it's more effective that it shows as a build instead of just giving it to you one by one. So quickly, I will talk about science communication products as like data visualization types of graphs. There are a variety of them, but I will only talk and show a few examples. So first are posters. The advantage of posters is that they can potentially reach a large audience. They can remain displayed for a longer period of time. But some of the challenges are that they are expensive to print, They could be difficult to transport, and they're also time intensive. A second commonly used ones are newsletters and fact sheets. Advantages are they could be quick to produce and they're easy for a broad audience to consume. Some of the challenges is that they have limited space availability. So there's only so much you can put in there. It's the same with posters as well. And sometimes they can be viewed as marketing tools. So if you simplify things too much, it looks like some kind of marketing tool. Another example are report cards, and I already gave an overview of report cards in the beginning. And as I mentioned previously, they are effective communication tools because they can provide accessible and synthesized information to wider audiences. Following this information pyramid and using the Mississippi River Watershed report card that we helped develop as an example, you can see that this report card is supported by primary data. We consulted and engaged with various experts, and we developed other products such as reports, newsletters, fact sheets that are all developed to support the report card. So we have a methods document that supported how we did develop the report card and did the calculations and everything like that. So the report card was able to synthesize different information from different sectors, such as the recreation, ecosystem, flood control, water supply, economy, and transportation. And we also were able to convene stakeholders from those different sectors. A number of them actually mentioned that this effort was actually the first time that they've been in the same room together. So that was very exciting to hear. And throughout the process, knowledge gaps were also identified. Report cards can also generate media attention. For example, the Chesapeake Bay Watershed report card. So I am here in Maryland, we're part of the Chesapeake Bay Watershed, and our university released report cards, the Chesapeake Bay report card, every year since 2006. And every time it was able to generate a lot of media attention. So the most recent one we released in June, and it generated 193 million media impressions just during the release event. Also during that event, we disseminated a newsletter. I showed it earlier as an example of ABT on the Framework for Environmental Justice Index for the Chesapeake Bay, which is a product of a class that I co-taught early this year. And you can see that we use different visual elements. We have included short narratives. And in the indicator section, as I showed an example earlier, we specifically asked the students to use the ABT framework to develop the indicator description and ask them to think about accompanying visuals that can help them make their point. And after the release event, my co-instructor and I, along with one of our students, were invited by our state senator in the state of Maryland to talk about the report card in his Facebook Live event. Various news articles were also written about the report card results. And I'm showing this to show an example on how developing effective science communication products could be able to help you reach your target audience. It can potentially be disseminated further using social and traditional media. So this will be our last mentee activity. And what kind of data visualization or science communication product are you or will be using specifically to inform policy? I know you have a homework from Will earlier, so maybe that's something you can answer as well. Oh yeah, Prezi is a good way to make presentations. Conceptual maps, yeah, indicators. So how are we visualize your indicators? Important. Pictures, press release. That's also very common, especially by universities. Infographics, charts, basin profiles or maps, reports, presentations, web pages. I didn't mention that earlier, but it's part of the science communication product that also very popular now. Web page, data sheets, bulletins, animations that also very effective, such as it's like creating short clips or videos. You know, you can put a lot of information in a short amount of time. Okay, so thank you for your participation. And I hope that the things that you learn in this workshop can help you in creating this data visualization or science communication products that you will be using in your country. So just to summarize some of the important points to remember, developing environmental intelligence and solving environmental problems requires effective communication and engagement. Second, science communication is defined as a successful dissemination of knowledge to a wide range of audience, including non-scientists or non-experts. Effective science communication uses storytelling, context, visualizations, and synthesis or integration. And finally, science communication could be done in a variety of ways. So with that, I will end my presentation. And if you want more information, you can email me directly. My email is here. You can go to our website, ian.amsis.edu. Like I mentioned, we have a variety of science communication products and we have symbols library, image library, and you can take this online course, the strategic communication for sustainability leaders, storytelling with data using social environmental report cards, and science advisory toolbox for environmental management are all live now. And you can take them at your own pace, they're all self-paced. You can take them, there are a lot of informational videos there. And I hope, and the last course in the case studies, we're actively developing that one, and it will be released in April, hopefully. So I can take some questions if we have questions, or appreciate any comments from you guys. Otherwise, there's no question, I can turn it over to Will, but we have a few minutes.
Thanks a lot, Vanessa. Yes, so we do have a few minutes for questions. If anyone would like to raise their hand, I'll call on you, and then Vanessa can answer. So in the chat box, yes, the presentation, so these sessions are being recorded, and the presentations, the recording and the presentations will be made available to everyone afterwards. So don't worry about that.
Okay, that would be great, actually.
I'm sorry, who's that?
I am Bubajan from the Ghana.
Okay, go ahead.
No, what I'm saying is, if the presentation will be available to people, we will welcome that.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Vanessa, has a question from Peter about is the communication modules, are these available online?
Yes, they are available online. So they are in the edX platform, which is a massive open online course. There's after a lot of different courses there, but I believe we're the only science communication course there right now. So I can maybe I can share it as a follow-up, but I can share the link to the specific course as well. So they're all online. They're self-paced. They're pre to audit if you want to get a certificate out of it, there's a small fee, but otherwise they are free. You only pay if you want the certificate, but all the content, they are free.
And I should mention that my colleague Maria, she actually took one of these courses, which is how we know about them. So maybe Maria wants to say a few words of endorsement.
Yeah, no, I'm what I think, I mean, there's so much important stuff that you covered in this 1 hour session. It's impressive, but I think what to me was the most important thing, it's this, you know, speaking with the different parts of the brain, speaking to the different parts of the brain. And I mean, what we are looking at with the water and sanitation issues and like trying to get the message across to politicians, we want to change their behavior. Or we want to change the behavior, like if we speak about hygiene and stuff, there's a lot of things just, you know, happening inside, and being able to use stories to basically knock down the doors and get people to hear the messages. I think that's a really valuable advice. Maybe we need to have another workshop just to discuss how we make great stories. But yeah, I just wanted to say that we have added the links to all the courses that you're having, Vanessa, on the global workshop page, so everyone can go there to get the presentations from this session and also to get the links. Thanks.
Yeah, and like as Maria mentioned, this is an hour, so I try to put in a lot, but not to overwhelm you. But in the courses, there's more videos, more explanation. And we do training, and sometimes we offer professional live courses. Right now, this is online, but we offer live courses as well. And I see a question on the chat about information that shows the impact of effective science communication. Actually, my whole dissertation research is about the effects of, or how we can use social environmental report cards, which is a form of science communication that we're using to address sustainability challenges and improve governance. So, and my dissertation is free online as well. And I have a paper on our Mississippi River Watershed report card that I also showed briefly on, and show like how they're effective and how the process, how we created the report card as well. So how the process is important. And I can share that. And also I know there are a lot of papers as well on effective science communication. So there is okay, so there's a comment here that we water people tend to be terrible communicators. Beyond the recommendation you've given, do you have any specific tips for communicating on water? I started as a water person too, as I mentioned earlier. I was a marine scientist, and yeah, that is an issue. And I think the most practical advice I can give is just think about how you, and I think this is an overly given advice, but think about how you can explain your research to your grandparents or your parents, right? Try to simplify, but not overly simplify. And that's very challenging. And communicating with water, and I think the best way too is just start with the why. Why is it important? We all know that water is important, and you can always find a reason for that. But the one thing we can do is make the benefit more personal. So if you're speaking to a person who loves water sports, then tell them why is it important for them to continue that hobby that they have, right? You start with that. Or if another important thing too is to connect people's livelihood with water, you know, because sometimes people don't see the direct connection, but everything is connected. So being able to find that connection will really help in communication. So how do we communicate to the visually impaired? Yeah, that is very challenging. And that's also something that we will have to work on as well. In creating videos, I know there's a lot of efforts in not just showing your images, you have to explain them as well. And online, you can put out text, like some kind of like a description of what your images are. So that's another whole new way of challenges in communicating visuals. And I will definitely share the link to the courses. I put the links to the courses, and as Maria mentioned, they're already in the website. And I will share my presentation to Maria as well, so she can send it to you all. Any specific advice for National Statistic Office on communicating visuals? I think the most practical is the removing chart junk, right? Just making sure that you use appropriate tools for the data that you use. Again, like simplifying is saying that is easy, but it's actually hard. I'm sorry, Will, I think I cut you off, so please go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, maybe we should wrap this up. But as a segue into the wrap up and the sessions to come, so I think Vanessa's done a fantastic job covering everything in 1 hour. And I think it was necessary that she touched on some of the theory there, including the reptilian brain. I recognize that part of the brain. But I think that was really interesting to kind of frame our thinking about communications. But where I think we would like to see be very useful is some practical feedback on what's good and bad communication. And I think some of the questions you're asking here are kind of leaning in that direction on the practical side. And that's perfect because, as you recall, that was the fourth part of the voluntary assignment, was for you to identify examples and share them with us. And that will be a focus of one of the sessions in February, where I don't know whether it's Vanessa or your colleague, but someone's going to be attending and give us some feedback on these examples. You know, what you think is good about this example, or what you think could be improved there. I think that will help to reinforce what we've learned today. And I really do encourage you. I think all monitoring people should be taking a full length course in this stuff, going beyond the 1 hour here. And just to say that this is the phase 3 of the Integrated Monitoring Initiative. If you look at our trajectory, the first phase was about getting as much baseline data as possible, which we were able to do actually without building a whole lot of capacity. The second phase was actually building the capacity in countries for generating data. So we've been focusing on that in phase 2. But this third phase is really going to be about using that data for policy. That's going to be the niche that we have in phase 3. And that's why this communication is so important now. So I think we're seeing from the point of view of IMI, this is just the beginning of this conversation. And with that, just transitioning us to the end, that's to say, yes, please, it would be great if you do this voluntary assignment. The deadline is 31st of January to send us whatever you have. And of course, in the meantime, feel free to ask any questions that you have on the assignment or on the monitoring teams. And please tell your friends, your other monitoring team members, or whoever, if they want to encourage them to join the sessions in February. What you see today is just a taste, but the more in-depth discussions, the more learning and sharing and community of practice will be in February. So please do come to that. And then just lastly, another reminder, as Maria said, we're having this survey as part of our the midterm evaluation of the Integrated Monitoring Initiative. So you would have all received an email with a link to an online survey. It's just 10 or 12 questions. It takes 5 or 8 minutes to complete, but it'll be really valuable for us if you could fill that out. Again, this will feed into our planning for phase 3. Yes, and with that, I think it would be great just to call this, bring this to a close. And I'd love to give my personal thanks to Vanessa and to Maria and to the interpreters, and of course to all of you for being here today. And I wish you a great end of the year, and look forward to seeing you in February. Thanks a lot. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
All right.